You walk into a room you've never entered and something is wrong. You know, with a certainty you can't explain, that you have stood here before. The light, the angle, the feeling, all of it, already lived. It lasts a second, maybe two, and then it's gone. This is déjà vu, and the strange part isn't that it feels like a memory, it's that there's no memory you can point to. By the end, the real question won't be why a place feels familiar. It'll be how your brain ever decides that anything is a memory at all. Start with something you never notice, because it almost never breaks. When you recognize something, two things usually arrive together. One is a feeling, a quiet sense of familiarity, this is known. The other is the actual memory, the where and the when, the recollection of having been here. Normally they travel as a pair. You see an old friend and you both feel that you know them and remember who they are. Déjà vu is what happens when those two come apart. The feeling fires, the memory doesn't. Psychologists have a name for this split. They separate knowing from remembering. Knowing is fast and vague. You're sure you've encountered something, but you can't say when or where. Remembering is specific. You can place it in time, recall the details, travel back to it. Most of the time, these two line up so seamlessly that you never feel them as separate systems. But they can be pulled apart in the lab, and déjà vu may be one place they come apart on their own. Here's the leading explanation. Déjà vu is a false signal of familiarity. Deep in the brain, in the medial temporal lobe, sit structures that act like a familiarity detector, regions such as the rhinal cortex that flag whether something has been seen before. The idea is that this detector briefly fires when it shouldn't. It says familiar. But the recollection system, asked to back it up, comes up empty. There's no when, no where, no memory to attach. That clash, strong familiarity, zero recollection, is the uncanny feeling itself. If that's right, you should be able to trigger it. And in the lab, you can. The psychologist Anne Cleary built virtual scenes, a bowling alley, a garden, a hallway, and showed people a new scene that secretly shared the same spatial layout as an earlier one they could no longer consciously recall. The familiar arrangement leaked through, even though the source memory didn't. People reported déjà vu, a strong sense of having been there, with no idea why. Familiarity without recollection, made more likely, right there in the lab. There's an older idea too, and it may also play a part. Sometimes a scene gets processed twice with a tiny delay, caught at the edge of attention, then a beat later in full. The second pass arrives already tagged as seen, and the brain, finding no recent source, files that fraction of a second old glimpse as a memory from the past. A present moment, mistakenly stamped as the past. Different route, same destination. A feeling of memory with nothing real underneath. Why would a brain build a familiarity signal that can fire on its own? One way to see it, your brain is, above all, a prediction machine. It doesn't take in the world fresh each moment. It constantly guesses what's coming and checks the guess against what arrives. Familiarity is one of those guesses, a fast, cheap verdict of seen before that saves you the work of full recollection. Most of the time, it's right, and you never notice it working. Déjà vu is the price of running that shortcut. Every so often, the verdict comes back yes, when the honest answer is no. The shortcut that usually serves you, misfiring in plain sight. The clearest clue about where this lives comes from a careful place. In some people who have temporal lobe seizures, an intense déjà vu can arrive as an aura, often the first subjective moment of a focal seizure. And when surgeons gently stimulate the rhinal cortex, the same familiarity region, that feeling of déjà vu can be evoked directly. This points to the circuitry behind it. But hold it lightly, déjà vu is extremely common in healthy people. An ordinary, occasional déjà vu is not a sign of anything wrong. This is a clue about mechanism, not a diagnosis of anyone. Very rarely, déjà vu that comes often or arrives with lost time or confusion is worth raising with a doctor, but that is the exception, not the rule. There's one more twist, and it's the strangest. Déjà vu often comes wrapped in a second feeling, a sense that you know what's about to happen next, that you could predict the room around the corner. Cleary tested this directly. In the middle of a lab-induced déjà vu, she asked people which way the scene would turn. They felt sure. They were no better than chance. The premonition was as hollow as the memory, a feeling of predicting with no actual prediction behind it. The same illusion, one layer up. So step back and look at what déjà vu is showing you. Familiarity and recollection are not one thing. They are two separable processes that usually agree. Recognition isn't a single act, it's a feeling and a memory, normally stitched so tightly you'd swear they were the same. Déjà vu is the seam showing. For a second or two, the stitching slips, and you get to feel one without the other. And the seam can slip the other way too. Stare at a familiar word, write it out, say it over and over, and it can suddenly look wrong, alien, like you've never seen it before. That's jamais vu. The recollection is intact, but the familiarity drains away. It's often called the opposite of déjà vu, the same machinery run backwards. The feeling that something is known and the knowing itself are built separately, and either one can flicker out on its own, leaving the other stranded. And mostly, this is a sign of a healthy brain, not a broken one. Déjà vu is most common in younger adults and tends to fade with age. It shows up more in people who travel, who remember their dreams, who are tired. It's the ordinary byproduct of a mind that runs on prediction and familiarity. A system so good at telling you you've been here that once in a while, it says it when you haven't. So the next time a strange room insists you've stood in it before, you'll know what's happening. Your familiarity detector has fired and your memory has nothing to hand it. The feeling is real. The memory behind it isn't. You may never have set foot here. Your brain just handed you the certainty that you did. And the only thing that decides whether a moment counts as the past is whether two quiet systems deep in your head happen to agree.